You are listening. Let's talk about Frasier.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. The Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, do you want to let the people know what we're here to discuss today?
So, this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie or show that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week, we are talking about Frasier from 1993, which is, in my opinion, one of the greatest sitcoms ever made that ran for 11 seasons from 1993 to 2004. I've been watching this on and off for probably 20 years. And I think it's one of the smartest, best written, best acted, funniest shows that have been made. And you just saw the first 3 episodes for the first time. So, just to briefly recap what Frasier's about, Frasier follows the story of Frasier Crane, who is a psychiatrist who for a long time lived in Boston. He has just gotten divorced and he moves back to his hometown of Seattle to kind of start over. And he becomes the host of a call-in radio show where he gives advice to callers. His father, who is recently retired, moves in with him. And then there's his brother, who is also a psychiatrist. There's a whole cast of supporting characters. And the show follows Frasier's efforts to make it in Seattle high society and accomplish his goal of making it in this new town. So, what did you think of Frasier?
First things first, this was surprisingly very funny, actually. It's been quite a while since I've actually sat down and, watched sitcoms. I know back in the day I used to kind of catch like some reruns of things like The Big Bang Theory and stuff like that, but not so much in the most recent years. So I've kind of been a little bit far removed from that type of TV show, but actually it was just genuinely very very funny in many places. It handles its comedy really well in terms of like the timing and sort of how things play off of each other. Certain callbacks it might do to things in earlier parts of the episode are great, and then you kind of have the whole like premise behind it as well. And I think what I quite liked about Fraser was a lot of like the more grounded and sort of real world issues that he kind of just deals with on a day to day. And again, I'm a little bit far removed from sitcoms, so I can't quite remember sort of like how they played out episode to episode. Some of my favorite ones, things like How I Met Your Mother and stuff. But this one immediately, and maybe it's Time of Life and stuff like that, where you can kind of see the relatability, and maybe not so much for myself, but I could see how like those type of things would transpire and play out, and sort of some of the humor behind it, which I think the show handles well. And then you then have like the characters. Genuinely, they do like a really good job of kind of introducing you to all of the different characters and giving them all sort of kind of like unique, distinct personalities that all kind of contribute to the comedic tone of the show. And I will have to say that my favorite is the maid that they bring in for whatever reason. Like I fully expected
Daphne.
her character. Yeah, definitely. I fully expected her character not to work for me at all when she was like first introduced, but she just quite quickly just became a fun part of the show.
Also, she'll have she's a physical therapist.
and the psychic.
And a bit psychic, yeah. And although that gets dropped very quickly, like the longer the show goes on, the less this comes up. Yeah, so she's hired because Martin, the dad, was injured in like as part of his job, and that's why he had to retire, and that's why he moves in with Frasier, and that is why he needs a physical therapist to help him recover from his injury, right?
Yeah, I forgot that part. I don't know why I forgot that was like in one of the early episodes, but actually she kind of quickly becomes part of the furniture and like helping out with like the laundry with like fabric softeners and stuff, and doing like fancy things with the coffee and stuff like that. She's a great sort of part of the show, and I think just like overall, it's it's a very fun watch actually. I would say it's actually quite captivating as well. Kind of when you suggested it, I was like, Fraser. It wasn't one of the sitcoms that like was highly talked about. It wasn't one of the ones that I think I'd heard of Frasier, because you kind of see you like certain things when you're like when you were checking the TV guide back in the day. So I think I'd like seen it, but I'd never watched it because it wasn't one of the ones that I was tuned into on my radar. But now I feel like I've like missed out on it all these years. Like especially because I'm like away from the time of watching sitcoms, I really feel like I've missed out on a period where that could have been on the rotation and actually watching Fraser.
So, what did you think it was? Based on its reputation, based on how it presents itself, based on how people talk about it, what did you think the show was going to be like?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of like the other one that I've like caught episodes of, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
Like when you see like screenshots or promotional material, it's like middle-aged guys in suits sipping sherry, right?
Yeah, but I hadn't really like caught any of that. And again, when I say it wasn't on my radar, it was just like no one really talked about it. Like no one talked about it. No one really mentioned it. I don't think I'd even seen that many images of it, and I don't know like in terms of its ratings and how popular it is compared to some of the other big ones like How I Met Your Mother, Friends. It honestly was just like not on my radar. So even like the expectations or like anticipation, I didn't really have any sort of kind of great expectations for it. It was just like I know that I'd maybe dabbled in a few other. I'm trying to remember the name of them because there's like a few others that like I had kind of watched but never really like got drawn into.
Just to give you an idea of how popular this show was, this ran for 11 seasons. It debuted at rank 7, so the seventh most watched show on broadcast TV at the time, to 26 million viewers. At its height, it was number 3, and its viewership was topped out at like 26 million viewers. So it's, for most of its seasons, it was in its 20s.
What year did it hit these heights?
So in season 6, which was in 1999, it was number 3 in the rankings.
I think that's probably part of the problem is that when I started to kind of tune into sitcoms, again, like, because you see me, I'm like referencing How I Met Your Mother, etc. I think those come a little bit later in the noughties. So even like things like New Girl and stuff like that are stuff that I'm like more familiar with. And then you might like have a rerun of like Frasier that like is on the schedule that you like might see. And I'm like, I'm just waiting to get to one of the later ones. I think it's probably mainly a timing issue, I would say, why I didn't get into this. But saying that, like this being from 1993 holds up very well so far anyways in the first 3 episodes. It's something that you can pick up in 2026 and it doesn't feel aged at all.
Speaking of aged, let's talk about Frasier. So what's your take on Frasier as a character? What's your takeaway from how he presents himself and what it kind of promises the next few seasons, the next 11 seasons will be like?
He was divorced, wasn't he? Because I think it was mentioned in the first episode. He was
Yeah,
divorced, has a kid. He kind of is like, well, in my take on him anyways, is like someone that's like trying to rediscover themselves after kind of committing so much of their life to one thing. Is very like particular about his like likes and stuff like that, and has like a certain like image and like status of himself, of things that he should be doing based on his like social status and stuff like that, like the way that he like reads his book in a specific corner in his flat, for example, or in the last episode that I watched of like the whole like restaurant fiasco and stuff like that between like him and his brother. I think actually what's positive is you kind of have like a few different like facets of him in this as well, because you then have like the whole like radio personality aspect of him as well. There's like someone that you kind of feel like he's like genuinely cares about like trying to help people through the radio and like trying to like help and like talk through their problems and stuff like that. But he's someone that is also like facing some of the same issues that his like viewers or his like audience is actually experiencing as well, which kind of adds to his commentary and stuff. But
you'll be shocked to hear that a lot of episodes revolve around this, where he has a problem at home and that then carries over into his show, or he has a caller that kind of puts a problem on his mind and he then deals with that in his personal life. So that crossover happens all the time.
And it makes sense to be honest. It makes sense and it kind of like sets the tone for the episode as well, because I think quite often you're actually starting off in the radio show with like someone calling in. So I think it's like a good way to actually set what the story's going to be about. You kind of forget it, but the show's only like 23 minutes and they do a very good job of like neatly introducing a story, giving you like beginning, middle and concluding the story really well within 23 minutes, which sometimes is a bit of a lost art in some of the modern shows.
That's one of the reasons for why I sing the praises of episodic television so much, or episodic storytelling, because like there's an art form to introducing a conflict, then a complication, and then a payoff all in 23 minutes. Having less time actually makes the writing harder. And I think that is one of the things that modern serialized shows like the 8-hour miniseries struggles with, where it kind of just plods along for hours and hours, and then at some point some plot starts happening in the last 2 episodes. And here there is not a minute wasted, right? Like every line has to move the story forward in some way, or elaborate on some character trait, or that will be important later on, and so on, right? So yeah, so I think that is one of the reasons why I like the 22-minute sitcom so much, is that like the good ones are really good at this. It's basically a sketch, but longer. And that means you have to be very economical with your lines, with the information you dole out. You have to set up a conflict and you have to, within 22 minutes, like there's a clock ticking and once the 22 minutes are up, it has to be resolved. There's just something elegant about that when it works. And I think there's very few shows that make it better than this. But just to stay on Frasier for a second, I think there's kind of 4 primary character traits here that kind of, in some combination of those 4, kind of inform plots in an episode of Frasier. The first one is that he's smart. Right, he's an educated psychiatrist. He has degrees and he's a PhD and all of that, right? So it is like his education and his status as being smart and being respected for his opinions and for his knowledge is a huge part of who he is. And that is then contrasted with Niles, who in many ways is even more accomplished. Like, he's also a psychiatrist and he's maybe more educated, but even more like the more academic of the two, right? And then he's very pompous, meaning he's very big, he's very loud, he feels very strong emotions, right? Like, when he's upset about something, he obsesses about it for days. If he is offended, he gets a grudge very quickly. If he's in love with someone, he's obsessed with them. That passion is, I think, very central to Frasier, and that means that you get a lot of everyday situations turn into sitcom problems and conflicts because he cannot let go of things. Like, once he latches onto an idea or to a person or to an emotion, he has to see it through all the way to the end. And then he's very principled, where if he wrongs somebody or if somebody wrongs him, he will not let it go. He has to do what's right. And if he doesn't, it gnaws at him for days. There's an episode in which he wants to park in a parking garage, and as he drives in, he changes his mind and wants to drive out, but he's being charged $2 because the first time block has started. And so they won't let him leave until he pays the $2. And he spends the entire episode at that cashier where he argues over the principle of, but he never actually parked here, and why is he being charged for something he didn't take advantage of, and all of that. And it drags out the entire episode. And then in the end, when Niles finally convinces him to just pay the $2, it's turned into $4 because it's been over half an hour. And that's an episode of Frasier. And then the fourth trait is that he's very insecure, especially about his status. So he wants to be respected. He wants to be accepted by his peers. If somebody does not take him seriously, if somebody does not give him the status he thinks he's owed, he can take that very personally, very, very quickly. Pretty much every episode of Frasier, unless it's focused on another character, draws from at least one, but usually multiple of these character traits. And I think that is ultimately what makes it all hang together, because they keep going to one of these four worlds over and over. But it doesn't get repetitive because they keep changing it up and they keep putting him in new situations that touch on one of these 4 qualities, most of which are good, right? The insecure one is that he doubts himself and wants to prove to himself that he deserves to be there, right? And the pompous one is more passion than anything else. And the pretentiousness kind of ties into that a little bit, but broadly these are positive character traits. And then that's kind of why we want to see him go through all of this.
And that sort of insecurity one is actually, it's always funny when like it plays off against his brother, especially when they're like comparing achievements, or he like makes a little remark along the lines. But I know you mentioned earlier about like how I'd see Frasier kind of develop through the seasons. I don't know, for whatever reason, and I could be like completely wide of the mark, but I kind of see him almost like developing and like letting go of like some of those like things that he holds dear, like, you know, the kind of like status side of things, and like wanting to be seen in like a prestigious way and stuff like that. I can, especially like the more time he spends with his dad, and again I could be completely wrong, but the more time he like kind of spends with his dad and relates to his dad, and it's kind of mentioned that they pick up some of their like pretentiousness from their mother. So clearly like there's a direct influence from the parent. So then, you know, more time with the dad would kind of start to change and shape how he kind of viewed the world and how he kind of saw things, and especially if he had like more setbacks, more challenges in what he was doing.
That's pretty much what happened. So the mom, I don't even remember off the top of my head why she's not around anymore, but she's not been around for a while. I think she got sick at some point. So Martin is very much a very different person than his sons, and that is something that is played for comedy a lot of the time, right? So in the pilot, Martin moves in and he brings in this armchair that's just a complete eyesore. It's old, it's got holes in it that are fixed with duct tape. It does not fit into Frasier's apartment whatsoever, but it's kind of a little bit of a reflection of who Martin is, right? And what the difference between Martin and Frasier is. There are episodes later on in the series in which it kind of comes out that his one big regret is that he never had a better relationship with his sons, and that he thinks they resent him from not giving them the kind of environment that they would have liked, because he's not interested in the same things and he couldn't share the sorts of things with them that they wanted and that sort of thing. A lot of their sophistication and their education and interest in academics and all of that comes from the mother. And we do see that once or twice. And that is something that's kind of been a rift between the sons and the father their entire lives. And now, after decades, it kind of comes to a head because now they have to share an apartment and they can't avoid each other anymore. And that comes out in things like when they go to the steakhouse in episode 3, where they just do not get along at all when it comes to where they want to hang out and what kind of environment they want to be in and how they want to behave and stuff like that, right? And what they value in a restaurant, for instance. So stuff like that happens all the time. That's one of the more common story beats that the show goes to.
That whole scene and how it played out of his brother trying to order the alcohol, the drinks, and the steak, and obviously like he was like still in a high end restaurant was pretty funny. It was hilarious, actually.
Yeah, and then by the end of the episode, they regret it. Martin kind of gives them the big speech about what snobs they are, and they realize it, and they feel bad about it, and so they try to make amends. Right? They are not simply sitting on their high horse looking down on Martin. They kind of do, but then when it becomes serious, they care about him, right? And they care about not being snobs, and they care about not looking down on people. Frasier's, especially, but also Niles's instinct is to be snobs, but their conscience gets the better of them and they want to be better than themselves. That is one of those things that I think makes these characters so relatable.
And what I like as well is that it's not like a complete like 180 in like one episode as well, which you wouldn't expect in sitcoms anyways. But and I can imagine like as the season and series progress, you can kind of start to see more and more change in sort of who they are and what they become. But it's not sort of one episode that they've upset their dad at this restaurant, and then all of a sudden they're able to kind of tolerate how they would deem as like a lower class restaurant or a restaurant that isn't up to their standard. But like you said, it's about like that caring about like the person, so they try to like tough it out, and then they sort of end up spending too much time at the restaurant trying to finish this meal, which is funny. But again, it kind of speaks to the character is like who the character is, and everything that they do is based on how that character would react to it. And a character like that wouldn't just automatically change after like one episode, and after upsetting the dad at that one time. It's like, yeah, you can have the compassion, but it still doesn't immediately change who you are, and it's more of like a gradual and longer term sort of process to. I wouldn't say unlearn, because some can say it's good, some can say it's bad, but change the way that you view certain things, or change sort of your tolerance for certain things.
And while he does mellow out as he gets older, like Frasier at season 11, he's quite a bit older than in season 1. And he's not fundamentally changed, but he's mellowed out and he is much more comfortable with who he is. But instead of changing, he kind of gets more complex, where we start noticing additional wrinkles or details to his basic character traits. We understand why he's so status conscious, and we understand why he's so desperate to meet women. It's because he'd been married to Lilith. You'll be surprised to hear his ex-wife's name, who is quite a character. You haven't met her yet, but look her up in some YouTube clips. She's amazing. But it's because he spent like over a decade with her, and he's afraid he will never meet somebody like that again. And so he kind of starts off in a midlife crisis, and it kind of goes from there. He doesn't have a character arc where he becomes less pompous or less insecure, but we get a deeper understanding of why he is that way. And that then builds on itself to motivate more plots, which I think is the way to go. So before we go into kind of the story, I want to briefly go over the cast. Any thoughts on Niles, the brother?
I think they sprinkle in just like the right amount of him. I feel like he plays off of Fraser's character really well. And then there was one thing, and I tried to make note of it in my head, where Fraser said something, and then what did he say? He said something, and then like he just like always has like a really like clever comeback, or he has like a really like quippy comeback to many things that are happening, which is hilarious. It made sense to actually get to episode 3 in Frasier, just because I feel like he becomes a little bit more prominent in this. You always had a sense that I'm not saying he's like different from like episode 1 and episode 2, but he's a little bit more front and center, and he's a little bit more baked into the story of episode 3, so that the quips, the sort of kind of like the charm and stuff like that he has, and it's like hilarious when he's like trying to pursue Daphne and stuff like that. You just kind of get more of him, and it just like really works really well in terms of like complementing Frasier and kind of the setting and playing off of him.
So I think Niles is actually my favorite character in the entire show, because they give all the cool stuff to him. You're absolutely right that he always has a quip, right? Especially when he kind of shows up at Frasier's place and he sees what madness he's up to this week. and then he will just have like a snarky remark from the sides. There's one where Niles is in some kind of trouble, and Frasier offers to shave his head in solidarity. There's a whole setup for it. And then Niles just says a gesture which becomes less significant with each passing year, which is a comment about how Frasier is balding.
Okay, I was trying to get the joke. I didn't get it at first. But
Well, like you saw how he's kind of losing his hair a little bit, and he comb in the beginning he's still got a comb over a little bit, and by the end he's mostly bald. And then there's another one where they go to some kind of social event, and Niles is mistaken for Frasier because they're both Dr. Crane. And then Niles says, "You must have mistaken me for my brother. He was already eminent when my eminence was merely imminent," because he's a few years younger.
yeah,
So Frasier has a few more years of experience. So he was already eminent when Niles' eminence was imminent. That's the kind of line Niles gets. You'll be maybe a little bit more surprised to hear that Niles gets all the slapstick. He does a lot of physical comedy in this, where he either falls down or sets fire to something or is in some kind of predicament. And there's like an entire sequence. It's a famous scene where he's ironing his trousers, so he's in his underwear, and he's ironing his suit for like some event, and he manages to set it on fire, and then he sets the couch on fire, and then as the fire alarm is going off, he extinguishes it with like a pot of boiling pasta water. Like he's boiling pasta, so he grabs the pot of the stove and extinguishes kind of the burning couch. It's like a 3-minute scene. There's not a single line, but the entire thing is just physical comedy. So you might not expect this from Niles, but he does a lot of that too.
does that work for his character? Because obviously, I'm kind of more seeing him being smart with his mouth as opposed to the physical side.
It works because he's so stuffy. He's so uptight and he's so uncomfortable in his own skin that the physical comedy becomes funnier. He's also a psychiatrist like Frasier, but despite being younger, he's more accomplished. And the main difference here is that Niles is a practicing psychiatrist, whereas Frasier essentially sold out as far as Niles is concerned by going into entertainment. And so a lot of arguments between them come down to like the medical ethics of even having that kind of show to begin with. That's one aspect, like the fact that this status conscious Frasier is being upstaged in terms of credentials and in terms of professional respect by his younger brother is also something that feeds into this. The reason this is significant is that Frasier started off in a different show. This is a spin-off. Frasier started off in Cheers, which was one of the most successful TV shows in the 80s. So for the 10 seasons before this, right? So it ran for about 10 seasons. When that ended, they spun off Frasier, which ran for another 11. He was the stuffy academic who hung out in this working class bar. That's where the comedy came from, that he was kind of out of place there. And now he's back in his hometown. He's in his home element. And so they needed somebody to upstage him, and they needed somebody to be a contrast to Frasier. And so that's why they created Niles. And they struck gold. Like he's a wonderful character. He enables so many plots, and he brings out so many things in Frasier that I think he's a wonderful character in this. And then also he's richer than Frasier, but that's because he married into money. And that is where Maris comes in. Now Maris, I think, gets mentioned in episode 2 or 3, right? Any impressions on who Maris is?
So I mean, I don't think we get too much information of her. I think it was in like episode 3. It's just him trying to pursue Daphne. Do you know what was actually funny as well? When he was saying about like she was meant to come to dinner, but then she kind of like slumped on the bed or whatever like that, and she kind of tells the story to Fraser.
She slumped on the bed and sighed, and that's the justification for why she's not joining them for dinner.
Yeah, and then it's funny because he says the same thing to their dad, and he just doesn't even bat an eyelid because he's like, yeah, I've been there, experienced it, perfectly makes sense.
And then when he gets into the steakhouse, he's smelling kind of the charred beef, and that reminds him of Maris and her tanning bed, because she's got a private tanning bed at home.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't have like a full picture of who like Maris is, and I actually forgot about like the tanning bed line that was related to her. Is she like some like super health freak, super like fit gym kind of? I don't know.
Not exactly that. She's this rich heiress. Maris the heiress is what she gets called later on, and she's kind of extremely not so much health conscious, but beauty conscious. She's constantly getting some surgery or undergoing some treatment or following some fad or something that is supposed to prolong her life and prolong her youth. So she comes from this extremely wealthy family, which it is later revealed they made their money in urinal cakes.
In what? Urinal cakes?
Yep.
I don't know if I listen anymore.
And she's hiding that from her high society friends. And then later on, when they get divorced, Niles blackmails her that he will release this information unless she gives him a clean divorce. That's a plot in like season 7 or something.
Yep.
And the thing is, we never see Maris, not once. We only hear about her, but she's a complete character. Like we know exactly who she is, but people only react to her absence and they talk about what she's been doing. And it just gets crazier and crazier over the seasons and more eccentric and more weird. But we never see her. And that is one of the strokes of genius in the show, is that like this is a common sitcom thing, right? Where you refer to an event or to a character, but you never actually see them. Maris is not the only character where this has been done, but because of how smart the writing is, they keep coming up with extreme ways of what Maris has been up to and what crazy things she's doing now, and how she's imposing her eccentricities on Niles. And then, she kind of just disappears after a while. Like Niles and Maris get divorced most like 2/3 of the way into the series. And she kind of disappears, but she disappears with us never having seen her. But we only see kind of people's reaction to that. Like at one point, she has an affair, or Niles thinks she has an affair with the fencing instructor, the German fencing instructor. Every time a character finds this out, they are shocked that this person would be interested in Maris. And the reactions just get more and more extreme. And so, but by that point, we have a complete picture of who Maris is and why that is funny.
Yeah, I think that's one that's like kind of sprinkled in, and I think that's probably why it kind of like washed over me a little bit that we didn't see her. Again, you can kind of see the relatability to it is again, and I think I kind of go back to that word with this show is because we kind of all always like kind of like know someone or like are aware of someone that's like always like chasing the latest trends or trying to like do the latest things, and you don't see it, but then anytime you like hear an update of them, it's like they're doing something like that's completely different. And I think that's even like more so in today's day and age and like social media, where like you might see someone's like into this now, and then like before you know it they've like completely changed, and it's like now their aesthetic is this, or like their interest is that, but they're like that person that you feel like but you don't know at the same time kind of thing, because it's like you're just getting those updates of that person. You're like, oh, and it just kind of becomes, I wouldn't say in today's age more absurd, but I think the keyword here is just like the relatability of it and how it aged well to a point where you can kind of like see something like that still being able to work in, or granted in like a slightly different way, but still being able to work in today's day and age.
Yeah, Maris with an Instagram account would have been something to see. That would have been glorious. But I think you're absolutely right. Like it keeps its relatability because like these people are not relatable. These are PhD psychiatrists living in penthouses in Seattle. Niles is married to a millionaire heiress, and they live in a mansion and they have servants and all of that, right? Like in one episode, Frasier gets a butler. And he loves it. He loves every minute of it because it's like an old school English butler. Like this is not relatable stuff, but as people, they are relatable. Like when Frasier is insecure about something, or when he's got a rival at work, or when he's got a crush on somebody who's not interested in him, or whatever, or there's some hilarious reason for why they can't be together, or whatever. That is relatable. It's universal enough that anybody can kind of relate to it. Just to power through this a little bit, how about Daphne?
Honestly, I have no clue how she works for me, but she does. Like genuinely, like from the first moment, and they were doing like the whole like psychic stuff. I was like, she's a little bit weird, and she's gonna be like that weird cuckoo character in the series. But I think it was like honestly, like I thought that 1 minute, and I think about 2 minutes later, and I kind of watched the first episode a few days back now, so I can't remember exactly what it was that turned me, but it was in that whole setup. And again, she's another one that just has great lines in the show. She just kind of says some just like funny stuff, and it's also the way that like people kind of react to what she's doing and what she's saying as well that like really elevates her character, especially in the early parts. And I know you mentioned that they kind of drop it, but like the whole like psychic stuff and how like they all react to it is just fascinating. Even like the whole work when they were like interviewing a whole bunch of like physiotherapists to kind of come in and look after their dad, and he kept like kind of being grumpy, and then like they just kind of like immediately hit off, and he was like so like open to like hiring her. Just like that whole the way that played out. Again, like I can't remember the exact details of it, but I think that might be like the quickest turnaround of this character might not be for me to actually this is a great character.
Yeah, so the thing about Daphne is that I think so they drop the psychic thing very quickly. This kind of disappears after a few episodes, and then it gets mentioned when it's convenient, but I think she has visions twice after this, like in the later seasons. But she mostly becomes kind of a straight man kind of character who just suffers from having to work for Frasier. She's probably the most grounded person in the entire cast. Martin is close, but definitely, I think definitely is that the reason that works is that everybody else is so over the top, right? Like if she was as eccentric as Niles and Frasier, it would not work. It would be too much. You need somebody who's a little bit more normal. Now we do meet her family, and her mother is like a walking guilt trip, right? She's the mother-in-law from hell. Like every word out of her is abrasive. The father is kind of a deadbeat drunk who disappeared out of Daphne's life because he felt like he wasn't good enough for her, and she's got like 8 brothers or something who are all kind of like these stereotypical Manchester lads. Like they're loud and they're con artists and they're liars, and you know what I mean? Like it's lays on the cliches very thick, and they keep showing up to take advantage of Frasier and that sort of thing because he has to be nice to them because they're Daphne's family, but he regrets it and he just tries to get rid of them all the time. But the key thing about Daphne is that the first second Niles sees her, he falls in love with her, right? Do you have any idea where that might go?
Unsure. I mean, you said that they like he was still married after like 7 seasons, and one thing I know about these like sitcoms is that they do carry these stories through episodes. So I wouldn't expect it to be a big focus on like every episode, but you'd like have hints to it. It's like again with like the psychic thing, and again you say they drop it very quickly, but even like by episode 3, it's not really mentioned. But the only time it's mentioned is when Niall has that interest in her, and then he has to kind of play along like she's actually correct, just to kind of boost her ego because he's kind of infatuated by her.
He doesn't want to reject her, so he just pretends he has this condition that she thinks he has.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. It's just like a new way of telling the same joke and adding like different layers to it and different contexts to it. But I can see them kind of getting together eventually, and him kind of bringing them like her bringing him back down to earth a little bit from where he's been. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like I kind of see both characters kind of coming back down to earth a little bit with like Fraser through his like father, and it seems like he'll probably have like some other like love interest and stuff like that in there.
So Niles admires Daphne from afar for like 6 seasons. And then he gets divorced from Maris, which takes about a season because Maris drags it out because she has kind of a grudge against Niles. And then Daphne is supposed to marry the lawyer that helped Niles get divorced. And then they elope at Daphne's wedding and kind of get married in secret. And then they get married officially later on, and then they're married for the last 2 or 3 seasons. That's kind of where that goes. So it carries over through the entire show, but they do change the status quo, and not for the better. Like the last couple of seasons, like they don't really make the marriage as funny or as interesting as Niles's very unhealthy like fixation he has on Daphne. And he never acts on it. He never does anything inappropriate, but he just wishes he could be with her, but he can't. He never cheats on Maris. But there's always something in the way between them. Either one of the two is married, or when he's single, she's dating somebody and is getting married, and so on, right? So it drags out for quite a while, but they get a lot of mileage out of this unrequited love that Niles has for Daphne.
So the marriage is never as fun as the chase, is it?
Mostly because they can't come up with a joke where like there's no real conflict. They're just happy, and they do have their fights and all of that, right? So there are plots that come out of this, but it's not like in general the last 2 seasons or so are a little bit weaker than the rest, and that is the ones where they're married. And one of the things that drives the first 6-7 seasons kind of goes away, and they never really replaced with something, even though they absolutely could have.
How much impact? Because obviously, I kind of expect like her to bring Niall back down to earth, but how much impact does his character have on her as well? Because again, you would kind of expect him to kind of introduce her to new things and things that she hasn't experienced, and that like to kind of shape and change her a little bit.
So she does kind of get lifted into this life of luxury, right? First, because she kind of becomes a friend and spends a lot of time with Frasier and Niles, just living in that apartment and being at the parties and all of that, right? That whole class difference is something that comes up. I don't think Niles changes her very much. It's very much a matter of him having the courage to be honest with her. And then once she realizes his feelings, it falls into place relatively quickly. She probably has the least big change in all of these major characters because she's very much kind of the straight man who's kind of the normal perspective among the chaos of the other characters. And then last one in the main cast is Martin. Any thoughts on him?
I think he's alright. I don't dislike him, and again, I think he brings like a good element to the show, but I don't think he's like as major of a draw compared to the others in the cast. I think again he serves as a good contrast to Frasier and his brother in kind of playing that more sort of like down to earth character. But I'd be lying if I said that there was like anything really that like was in there. I think actually, the kind of the best part that Martin plays is more the emotional side of things, and like the more for the first couple of episodes anyways. I don't know how it progresses, but when you kind of first get into sort of the heart of the show, away from the comedy, away from the quippy lines and stuff like that, the actual like centered like conflict of what's going on and like what needs to be taken care of, I feel like he's a good driving force for that. Especially like in like the first, I think it was like the first or second episode when they're like kind of bickering about the apartment and taking over each other's space, and there's like a moment where they could like apologize to each other, but then they don't. But then Fraser goes to his TV station, and then his dad calls in and almost kind of like apologizes in a roundabout way. So far, is just adding that emotional and more like, and I know he's meant to like get involved in the jokes as well, but it just doesn't land as much from him. Whereas like the more story focused aspect of his character is kind of what's doing it for me.
Yeah, so the main thing about Martin is that he is the father who has never had a good relationship with his sons. He is the kind of down to earth working class guy when his children are all academics. And that kind of gives him a chip on his shoulder about how he feels like they're smarter than him, which they are, and that they look down on him, which they kind of do, but not really. But also his pride is really wounded because while he was a policeman, he was an authority figure and he commanded an amount of respect from that. But then when he got shot, suddenly he became an old man who needed to be pitied. And Martin does not want to be pitied. He does not want to be coddled, and he does not want to be parked somewhere and kind of ignored. And him being so different from Frasier, but like in the first episode, Martin moves in with Frasier because Frasier drew the short straw, right? And they kind of keep trading reasons for why Martin should move in with the other. And then finally Frasier loses, and that's why he moves in. And that kind of sets the tone for what their relationship is like in the beginning. And that definitely drives pretty much everything that comes after this. But also Martin is the one with the common sense, because as smart and as educated and as sophisticated as Niles and Frasier are, they have no common sense. They just overcomplicate everything. They overthink everything. And that kind of drives a lot of the comedy and a lot of the conflict. But Martin generally is kind of the down-to-earth guy who has seen it all, who has life experience, who cares about basic things like family and a cold beer and a comfortable chair. Like he's very much the opposite of Frasier and Niles in that way. And that is kind of what he contributes to all of this. And there are numerous episodes in which that kind of collides, where either Martin kind of cramps the style of Frasier and Niles, or when Niles and Frasier kind of embarrass Martin among his working class friends. So it's that kind of thing, right? So it's nothing terribly original, but that kind of dynamic underpins a lot of what goes on in the show. And I think all of that is set up in the first episode, and it kind of builds on that. And like I said earlier, it does not change very much, but it gets more complicated, where you find out more about Martin and his history, and especially his relationship to his wife, and how that translates into how he relates to his sons and all of that, right? It all gets very complicated and nuanced and sophisticated in the storytelling. And there's no major retcons, really, where you say, oh, they had to change this character to make this joke work, or they made this change to the backstory and now you have to ignore everything that came before. No, it all kind of fits together. You kind of just get an increasingly complex view of who these people are. And then last character I want to get into was Ross. Any thoughts on her?
Is she the TV station host woman?
Yeah, so she's the radio producer. I'm not sure how much we actually get about her in the first 3 episodes, but any thoughts on her?
Not much. And we don't get much.
So Ross sticks around for pretty much the entire show. And she very much becomes a friend of Frasier's. And she's also got kind of this working class thing going on, because she's not as educated and all her interests are much more down to earth. A lot of the humor comes from how much she dates. After a couple of seasons, that turns into something where she becomes a single mom, because she has an affair with a much younger guy who's in college, and she kind of just decides, I'm going to raise this child on my own because the father can't contribute anything. He's too young and that sort of thing. And that's only drama. I'm going to do this on my own. Like, this is a very typical 90s character, right? The single mom who kind of has to juggle raising a child and the job and all of that, right? So that is kind of where she goes. And so this party girl essentially has to become very responsible very quickly. A lot of the shenanigans that Frasier gets up to are pretty much without consequence for him because he's already got so much money. But whenever Ross gets caught up in this, a lot is at stake for her because she can't afford to just quit her job over principle or pick a fight with the station manager or whatever it might be, right? So she's very down to earth, very practical. She takes a lot of initiative, but she is also a big contrast to Frasier in terms of her temperament. Like they make a good team, right? And that is kind of how they brave all of these conflicts at the radio station when they get a new owner, when they get a new manager, when there's like another show that's a competition. There's an episode where they are kind of relegated to kind of the night slot and have to do like the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. show. And it gets very trippy very quickly. So those are kind of all the major characters, right? And I think one of the things that makes the show really work is that all of these characters have very simple, straightforward characterizations from the beginning. And then they keep adding detail to it and it keeps building on it. And they keep finding interesting ways of how these characters clash with each other. And I think that is why all of these characters, like we just went over the main cast and the kinds of stories that they produce. And there's like recurring supporting characters and all of that. But I think that is kind of the DNA of the show that makes the whole thing go.
I think that's kind of like, again, the positive about like the different characters is that they have enough kind of going on within themselves, it seems, through the series. But I can imagine still probably feed into sort of Frasier and like his character and kind of play off of him quite a bit and like continue to like shape him and like elevate like Frasier and his character whilst also kind of having their own things going on.
A lot of that ties into why Frasier works so well as a character, because this actor has been playing this character since 1984, if you count Cheers. A lot about him is just not relatable, right? Like he's pompous, he's arrogant, he's a snob, he's a middle-aged man who lives in a penthouse. This is not a typical sitcom character, which tend to focus more on kind of working class characters. And I think what part of the challenge that the writers set for themselves with the show is how do you make a character like this likable? And I think we talked about a lot of the aspects of this, that a lot of it ties into very human things about being insecure and about wanting to make it and wanting to be accepted by your peers and all of these things, and having principles that you don't want to compromise on and all of that, right? So these are all things that I think are relatable and that are kind of an inroad that if you like the show, that's kind of your on-ramp to going on a journey with Frasier. And I think that's kind of why that works. And this show has been described as the smartest show on television, because like when you just follow the dialogue, there's a lot of references to high art, to artists, to opera, to fancy wines, and that sort of thing, right? What was your like impression of this when you started watching this? Like, did you feel like you were watching something sophisticated or snobbish or elitist or anything like that, right? Like, what's the vibe you got from it when you started watching it?
No, definitely. I think I saw how intelligent the show was in terms of weaving together a strong narrative. The word that I've used the most in this review is like relatability. It definitely didn't come across as snobbish or elitist or anything like that. Even though you've got two characters in here that are very snobby and very elite in their own right, but the way that the writers are able to kind of craft a story that can resonate with people, are able to kind of like weave in some like kind of funny jokes and stuff in there. I think there's kind of like a lot to be got from sort of the show and the writing and how like just like it handles its characters and its story and its comedy and like all the different facets that it's kind of pulling from to kind of to make the show. I think it has the right level and the right balance of all of that.
My take on it is that this show is smart, but it's not smart because it talks about like composers and artists and that sort of thing, or makes like literary references or whatever. That's all window dressing. What makes this show smart is how much work goes into every line. This entire show is kind of a masterclass in farce, which I think has fallen out of fashion a little bit. There's a whole bunch of 80s and 90s sitcoms or comedies that do farce very well. But I think this one is at the very top of that genre, where a lot of episodes deal with some kind of misunderstanding, or Frasier tells a lie that flow from one of his character traits, like usually to brag to somebody or to maintain face, or because he feels it's expected, or because he doesn't want to admit that he's wrong about something. And then it keeps building on it. There's a lot of episodes in this where it kind of starts off with something simple, like a simple lie usually, And then it escalates and snowballs into a big showdown at the end, where everything kind of just blows up in everybody's faces. Like there's an episode in which he and a couple of characters go on a ski trip, and there's like 4 different bedrooms, right? So you've got Frasier, you've got Niles, you've got Daphne. Like there's the ski instructor, and I think one of the minor characters, like one of the other radio hosts. And there's like misunderstandings about who is interested in whom and who's there to hit on whom and who wants to get with who. And by the end of it, all of them have been spotted in each other's bedrooms, because there's like this massive game of musical chairs going on where everybody has a reason to be in everybody else's bedroom at like 1 a.m, and somebody sees them and they don't ask, they don't talk about it, so they make assumptions, and those assumptions then lead to a more like a bigger misunderstanding. And by the end of it, it all kind of comes out into the open, and it just kind of explodes in one big climax. And that is kind of what a lot of episodes of Frasier are about, where it starts off simple. Like there's an episode in which he's dating this woman, and her mother is visiting Seattle, and she's like in town for an afternoon. And so she's dropping by for a visit unannounced. The family is Jewish, and the mom has assumed that the guy she's dating, her daughter is dating, is also Jewish. And she will be upset if she finds out that he's not. So the entire family has to pretend to be Jewish. And like Niles and Martin and Daphne kind of drop in as this is going on. And so they have to be briefed in real time, and they have to fall in line and join in on the deception, because Frasier doesn't want to lose this woman who he's dating and who he's quite fond of, and under better circumstances he would be able to talk it out with her mother. But like the entire family just has to pretend to be something they're not for like 22 minutes, and one by one more and more people are joining in and are being drawn into the misunderstanding and into the lie, and it just gets more and more complex, and there's more and more moving pieces. That's the kind of thing the show does really well, and you can only do plots like this if you are very smart about your comedy, if you are paying a lot of attention to every single line, and you care a lot about setup and payoff, where if you want to pay something off by the end of the 22 minutes, it has to be first foreshadowed and then set up and then escalated before you can get to the payoff. The writers of this knew this very well, and they constructed all of these episodes to follow those kind of basic rules. And as a result, when the episode starts, you have no idea where this is going to go. But as kind of the pieces start moving into position and things get more and more convoluted and more desperate, it just starts building on it. And it's like you're watching a pressure cooker boil. You don't know when it's going to boil, but it's going to come to a boil very soon. And then it's all going to fly all over the place. That is kind of why I think it's the smartest show on television, at least of its time. And not a lot of shows have come close to this. Like there's smart shows out there, right? But I think this one is just consistently witty and detail-oriented and meticulous in how it crafts its comedy. It has all sorts of one-liners in this, like Niles especially gets a lot of them, but other characters too. But kind of the core of it is very careful and very deliberate and very technical. I think that's what makes it work.
I could see how the show kind of like would kind of build to that and would have that reputation just off of the first few episodes, anyways.
Yeah, and people kind of get caught up on like the paintings and the sherry and the cultural references, but those are just window dressing. And the actual jokes are quite lowbrow in a lot of cases. Like there's an episode where Niles discovers like a treasure box that he hid as a 12-year-old, and it's got a Latin pun carved into it: "Semper ubi sub ubi." And I realized this has to be funny, so I looked it up. It translates into "always wear underwear." It's like a literal translation of that. And it's like a popular Latin pun. And so I realized this had to be funny when they mentioned it. But I don't speak a word of Latin, so I looked it up. And then when I read the translation of it, said, "Oh yeah, I appreciate this for being funny." And also I appreciate 12-year-old Niles as a juvenile 12-year-old, but very pretentious and precocious 12-year-old making that pun. And his peers all finding it funny, like in his private prep school and whatever. So it's stuff like this where it really rewards kind of engaging with the joke and putting a little bit of work into it and paying attention. And if you do, you get rewarded with stuff like this. But it's kind of dressed up in this sophisticated high society skin. But I think that is kind of a distraction. And the contrast from that, I think, adds to the comedy as well. One more topic I wanted to bring up was about how in, I think, 2022 or 3, there was a revival show that is currently has 2 seasons out, and I think it's still going. The story there is that his son moves in with him, right? So where Frasier season 1 started off with Martin moving in with him, now his son, who is kind of in his early 30s, is moving in with him. And the thing with Freddy, and we meet Freddy throughout a bunch of spots throughout the series, and he kind of goes through puberty and kind of challenges Frasier as a dad and that sort of thing. But Freddy kind of, we learn, dropped out of university and became a firefighter, and now has to move in with Frasier at the start of the first season of the revival. That kind of sets the tone, right? Where it's kind of taking kind of the formula from the original, but it kind of turns it on its head, because now Frasier is 30 years older, and now his son is moving in with him as opposed to his father is moving in with him. And it kind of leads to similar situations where it again goes to a lot of the same wells that we've been talking about class and about ego and status and all of that, except Frasier is now older and more mellow, but everybody else kind of has not caught up with him, so there's a lot of that going on. But then it kind of manages to kind of preserve kind of the idea of the farce, right? Like, it's one of the few shows at the moment actually doing real farce. A lot of the structure I've just talked about, they managed to carry over into the new show. And so in my opinion, it's probably the only, or at least one of the few legacy sequels or revivals that actually work. And the reason it works is because it's different from the original. They're not making the same show they made in 2004, but they remembered what worked about it, and they carried as much of that over as possible and made changes when necessary. And for that reason, if you like the first 11 seasons, this is not as good as Frasier at its peak, but it is more Frasier. And it's kind of true to what was good about Frasier. Not quite to the same extent, but you get a similar kind of thing from it, which I think is notable, because I can't name another legacy sequel that pulled that off.
The only one I would kind of give it to was Dexter Resurrection, which again it's kind of like similar, but where it's like it's not Dexter at its peak, but it gave enough flavors of Dexter and what it was, tried to like, you know, make it a little bit new and interesting, and overall kind of actually delivered a very solid season of TV. You know, not the best thing in the world that you're ever going to watch, but more Dexter and sort of kind of more of what you liked, and, you know, again the callbacks and drawbacks from, you know, what worked in its heyday.
For each of those, you can name like 5 where that didn't work, right? Where they just didn't know what worked about the original, or they were not able to capture, you know, the essence of that. And Frasier just manages it. They need a few episodes to really get going, but they managed to kind of bring that back for most episodes. Any other thoughts or questions or observations about Frasier before we close out?
No, I've got no more.
Yeah, so what's your bottom line? Did watching the first 3 episodes and did our conversation make you want to watch more of this? Or is this like a relic from 30 years ago, and this is funny enough, but not something you want to spend too much time on?
What's funny is you spoiled every big sort of plot point to happen with all the characters. Yep. But I can imagine the journey kind of getting there is the fun part in the show. Would I watch it? Yes. I think these are like, you know, easy 20 minutes of a piece of TV that you can watch. And sometimes I'm not in the mood for anything that's like heavy, or like in the mood for like a long movie or like a long series. So I can definitely see where this would like fit into like my viewing schedule. Would I want to continue watching it? I would say yeah. I would say I'm kind of like mostly positive on it. It's just kind of more time and where and when it kind of fits in. But it's something that I would recommend people checking out, especially if you kind of like things that run for like many seasons and many episodes and stuff like that. I think this is probably like serve it up, and it's like really kind of clever TV. So yeah, I would say it's one to check out. I just don't know what I'm going to check out, but it's definitely one that I would check out again.
But the nice thing about this is that you don't have to watch it. Like, I would watch it in sequence, because the status quo does in fact change slowly, but it does. But it's not like hung up on details. The relationship between Daphne and Niles kind of gets more messy over time, but it's not like you have to have seen several key episodes to kind of understand where they end up, right? Like, we know from the beginning that Niles has an infatuation with her, and she initially is oblivious to it, but then you can kind of see how that changes over time, right, as they spend more time together. And it's that kind of thing. And so you can just watch an episode at a time, and you don't have to invest like weeks and weeks until you get to the good part, because the good part comes after 22 minutes, right? So I think that is one of those things, I think, that's been lost. Like, sitcoms do still get made, but it's kind of very much out of fashion. And there's like just something comforting about getting a self-contained story with consistent characterization throughout the episodes. Like, they never really retcon all that much. Maybe minor details here and there, but like the characters never fundamentally change. Like, they have a very clear idea of who these people are from the beginning, and they kind of grow throughout the 11 seasons, but it's not like they ever randomly change anything just to make a joke work, right? It all flows very organically. And so that's kind of why I would recommend this. I would also say this is like, I really like smart comedy, and this is like one of the, not in terms of what the jokes are about, but how the jokes are told. And that is just a masterclass in this. That's one of the reasons why a lot of comedies are kind of unimpressive, because I can just compare it to how an episode of Frasier is crafted. And a lot of comedies are just too focused on just a wacky character or just, somebody talking funny. There needs to be a little bit more to it than that. There needs to be set up to it. There needs to be meat on the bones. It has to be consistent with characterization. Otherwise, it's not that funny. The joke and the conflicts has to flow from the personalities. And if those personalities change to make the joke work, then the joke doesn't work. And stuff like this. And basically anything like this that a lot of comedy does wrong, Frasier does right. And so for that reason, it's my favorite, bar none. And that's why I would recommend it to anybody who likes good and smart comedy.
Yeah, I would say of all kind of the different comedies that we've reviewed recently, I think this one definitely is like, definitely up there compared to some of the others that we've watched.
Yeah, and it's also like, it's very different, right? This is nothing like Airplane, for instance. All right, shall we wrap it up?
I guess with that, we've reached the end of today's episode. If you reach this part of the podcast, as always, we appreciate you press and play. We appreciate you rocking with us and giving us a listen. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, then I guess we're moving this review into your house. We are the This One Podcast.
Good mental health.
Ciao.